And we're back here at the Friday afternoon of the Green Rush. Thanks for sticking with us. We're now going into our next panel. I want to introduce Adam Smith, referred to us by Beau Whitney. Thanks, Beau, for that. And David Holland. I'm going to let them introduce themselves rather than me take the thunder away. Let's start with David.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for this honor to be part of this panel here. I'm a litigation attorney in New York with the longstanding interest and advocacy in this space. I'm the head of Empire State NORML, which is New York's chapter of the National Organization for Reform Marijuana Laws. I'm a co-founder of the New York City and the Hudson Valley Cannabis Industry Associations. Thank you for letting me be here today.
Okay. Adam?
Hi, I'm Adam Smith. Forgive me, I'm working off my phone. I'm having an audio problem on my computer. So if you can bear with the video. I am the founder and president of the Alliance for Sensible Markets, and we are specifically concerned with bringing about interstate commerce prior to federal legalization. And I think it addresses a lot of the issues that you've been talking about on the last segment.
Right. So the last segment we had a couple of guests who were very much looking to hold back the tide of interstate commerce in order to protect the local market. Now we're going to have, at least Adam is going to start to talk about why we should move forward with it. New York is a big state, but if you travel through upstate New York, you'll find it's like going through rural mid-America. It is a much different world than downstate is. And when people think of New York, they think of Manhattan. That's where David is, in that densely populated area that has a lot of cannabis activity that just went fully in the other direction. You can smoke out in the street. The police no longer, from what I understand, seem to care about it. And it's just passé. But now we're going to get another feel for what these folks think about Professor Mikos's paper. Kurt, you want to?
Yeah. So Adam, you're kind of going to be the professor's first true supporter on the sideline here. We've had a lot of state protectionism, and let's protect everybody, and no, let's not do that. And there are good reasons: social equity and economic empowerment, not just financial protection. Why are you a fan of the paper, and why do you want to see this before legalization?
Well, I mean, I'm certainly a fan of Professor Mikos's legal argument, and I'm trained as a lawyer, but have never practiced 35 years after taking the bar. So my legal advice is worth exactly what you're paying for it at the moment. But I think on the economic side, I think there's some important points that it really misses. First of all, there is no future in growing cannabis at scale in various parts of the country. There are parts of the country in which there is very, very well is going to be a future in growing cannabis. I believe that there is probably a future. There is almost certainly a future for locally grown craft cannabis anywhere that it's environmentally reasonable to do so. But what we've done with the siloed markets in many of the states that have siloed markets is we've really handed over the industry to a few large players who can afford to put in tens of millions of dollars into giant production factories that would not exist and that no one would have invested in absent these siloed markets, right? You would never, if someone said, go grow cannabis anywhere in the country you want to sell it nationally, you wouldn't pick New Jersey, almost certainly, right? I'm from New York, so I pick on New Jersey a little bit. At the same time, and in those states, right, in those consumer states that traditionally have always imported the vast majority of the cannabis that was sold there, right? Thousands of potential businesses in retail, distribution, delivery, product development, manufacturing, wellness, hospitality, all of these areas, most of which have far lower economic barriers to entry and capital requirements than large-scale cultivation, are stuck waiting years for a supply chain. They are then limited in their supply chain to very few choices. And out here on the West Coast in Oregon and Northern California, you have thousands of growers across legacy communities that have depended upon the economics of cannabis for generations, that have put everything on the line to go legal and do this right, that are now looking at an economic catastrophe from what looks from the outside like an oversupply problem, but it is actually a market access problem. If we had access to the markets that this region traditionally served, we would need every ounce of cannabis we could grow under current licensure, right? So that is the other half of or another part of the equity issue, the traditional market, which went from producers out here in the Pacific Northwest into consumer markets all over the country. What we're looking to do is to go to the Department of Justice to ask for clarification on what their stance would be if two legal or medical states decided to regulate trade between them. And Merrick Garland has said where the states are regulating, we're not going to get involved. And that's about all of the permission that any of the legal adult use markets have. On the medical side, you have the Rohrabacher-Blumenauer Amendment, which forbids DOJ from getting involved in state medical programs. And so we want to know if a state medical program in Delaware, for example, which has legal patients but very little access, said we're going to bring cannabis in from California or Oregon to provide for our patients, what would the Department of Justice do? And because this is an opt-in situation, it would allow states that want to protect their nascent production industries to do that. But it would allow states where it doesn't make sense to build an entire industry around production that will ultimately become non-competitive under federal legalization to get their industries going or to provide for their patients in a way that makes economic and environmental sense and is better for consumers.
Professor Mikos, what's the Justice Department say to that request?
They would demur on that request. Anytime you ask them, hey, can I do X, Y, and Z, they'll say, no thanks. So I'd be surprised if Merrick Garland actually responded to that, or one of the deputies actually responded to such a notion. But I think Adam is onto something here, which is that the claim that the federal government would somehow be bothered by interstate commerce and cannabis. As I mentioned before, I don't buy it. I don't think they see a difference between in-state and across state line sales. But certainly if both states that were involved in the transaction, the exporting state and the importing state, were okay with it, I think any pretense that the DOJ would object to that goes away. So I think there would be value maybe in that first step that Adam describes, which is getting two states together, getting Oregon together with Iowa or some new state down the line that legalizes medical cannabis that figures, hey, we can't grow this stuff. Other states have a head start on us. We're not going to have a cultivation market here, but we've got consumers that need the product and don't want to wait 3 years for the industry to develop. I think getting two states to agree to this, and they could plow ahead, or at least they could say, hey, if you want to try this, firms, go ahead and ship it. You're taking on the legal risk, but we're not going to stop you. Then I think that the chances that the DOJ would actually intervene are slim to none.
So Professor, would it matter whether the states are contiguous or not?
It would make it a lot easier. If you have to pass through Idaho, for example, that makes it tough. But if you had, if this were Oregon,
you can't even get hemp through Idaho.
That's why I chose. Yeah, that's why I chose. I know it's great that you put that out though.
That's when you put it on the roads, but right, contiguous states, it's very easy. So I'm gonna lay out my plan, and then I'm gonna be quiet, and I want to hear everybody's response to this. It would have been nice if I had done this with Hoffman still here. I got to make sure nobody can identify me. So here's what I plan on getting a medical license here in Massachusetts, because with a medical license, I'm protected under Rohrabacher. I'm going to fly out to California, find a licensed grower, buy product from that licensed grower, have it tested in California to the Massachusetts standards, put it on an airplane and fly it back. When it lands at Logan, I may actually invite the DEA and the FBI to meet me there, because if they have any problem, I'm going to explain to them that Rohrabacher keeps them from expending their resources, and I'm a medical operator. So I'm bringing it in under the medical license. And then once I have it in the warehouse in Massachusetts, we're allowed as a medical operator to convert a certain amount of that to rec use. So tell me, what am I doing wrong?
You're breaking state law.
Adam nailed it.
You're also outside the realm of what Rohrabacher allows.
Right. You're right. So the thing is that none of this happens politically until two governors decide to match up their systems, right? Otherwise you're breaking state law, right? And so, I appreciate the thought that the DOJ would demur, which is why we are attempting to get governors to ask this question, right? And specifically to get, on the medical side, to get clarity on what does Rohrabacher cover, right? And I would tell you that I'm pretty confident that Earl Blumenauer believes that Rohrabacher that his amendment would already cover interstate commerce, but it's going to have to be approved by the governors. It's going to have to leave one one regulatory system and go into another regulatory system. So
I
you need
agree with that.
yeah, that's the problem.
But
Go
the
ahead,
problem,
David.
under your scenario, though, the problem that you have, David, is that you've created, Rohrabacher really specifically pertains only to medical marijuana and only within one single state siloed operation. So to fly over from one side of the country to another, to then convert what's otherwise probably recreational use, but would qualify as compliant with the medical standards of Massachusetts, and fly it back and then claim it to be, while interstate commerce, effectively as good as what had it been grown in Massachusetts, that's going to defy pretty much every precept of state and federal law and put you into the problem. So you're not really in interstate commerce as much as you are operating outside of every legal structure, which there is a tolerance for right now with regard to Rohrabacher and the other things that have been out there as spending appropriation amendments.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that, well, two things. One is that you could do this, and I agree with David and Adam. The fact that it's against state law means it's also not protected under Rohrabacher Farr.
Right.
The only quirk is that you could then say, well, the state law itself is invalid because it violates the Dormant Commerce Clause. And so you might be protected by Rohrabacher Farr, but then there's another problem, which is that remember that Rohrabacher Farr applies to the DOJ. That's just one federal agency out of about a dozen that can get its hands on you. Department of Transportation, Department of Homeland Security, the folks who run security at the airport, they can do whatever they want. They can seize that shipment and destroy it. They can't criminally prosecute you because the DOJ and the DOJ alone does that. But there are a lot of other federal agencies involved, and Rohrabacher Farr only shuts off the DOJ, doesn't apply to anybody else.
David, I won't be picking you up at Logan on that one. Sorry.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Curt. 2 hours ago, you were like, okay, I want to go up there with you.
I don't know that guy. I'm here for my mom. I don't know who he is.
How do you get tire tracks off the back of a pullover?
So I will go to David Holland. I forgot I had two Davids. New York, flower now, medical patients, big announcements. People are selling it. New York is an expensive place for sure. How would interstate commerce or the dormancy clause affect the New York market? Tell me 2 years out.
Sure. I think it's an inevitability. New York will never be able to meet its own demand. And unofficially, it's believed to be the world's largest marketplace. And New York City alone does something over £1 million is what's been estimated. So that inevitably it's going to have to seek outside sources, whether it's going to be legal or not. It's going to be how it's always been done. So interstate commerce in that regard would be great. And I think that if they could come up with GMP and other testing standards to allow that to take place easily, that would be probably the best way to go. But with that, the Dormant Commerce Clause issue, it's an interesting thing. And I really have enjoyed reading the professor's law review article on it, because I come at this issue a little bit differently, which is, yes, the states can't discriminate from out-of-state product, but I'm not so sure that the feds would demur. But on a different angle that I've taken this, and I wrote this in an amicus brief to the United States Supreme Court in the case of Washington versus Barr, I believe that the federal government actually, when all three branches of it, being Congress, which has passed spending appropriations measures, and you have the executive branch with the Ogden and Cole memoranda and FinCEN guidance, and the United States district courts and going through courts of appeals upholding not only the McIntosh case, which said that medical patients were immune from prosecution under the Rohrabacher, but also that ancillary contracts other than flower-related contracts in the cannabis business are enforceable. At that point, when all three coordinate branches of government are trying to actually promote the state legalized cannabis industry, they have ceded the power through the 10th Amendment back to the states, which they had otherwise reserved under the Supremacy Clause of the United States Constitution. You have a nullification crisis that really needs to be resolved simply by Congress, rather than constantly batting around the States Acts, the MORE Acts, all the other proposals. Simply legalize it, deschedule it, and let the states handle it as a matter of, under their 10th Amendment and their police powers, regulate what they think is healthy and fair. And then the Dormant Commerce Clause becomes a much bigger, more forefront issue, because it will be then who are they going to get supply from and what should those standards be? So that's sort of how we look at it from New York. So 2 years from now, I believe New York will lead the way, because if it is and it remains the largest marketplace, then it's going to need to be supplied by all the other states that are out there. And if we go by Adam's theory, and Adam and I have talked about this before, if two states enter into a compact and were that approved by the federal government, you would run into the same sort of estoppel problem that they can no longer enforce the law because they're actually allowing the states to defeat the supremacy of the Controlled Substances Act. But then it would be just easy enough for all 48 other states to say, you know what, I want to join in that contract, but I don't have a ready need for a market to be supplied yet. But that's how you would just get around it. So it would be, an exercise of futility to find other ways around this rather than Congress just simply stepping in and saying it's time to simply deschedule this and make this a states' rights matter.
Hey, one thing to note is your estimate of £1 million is not so far off. I've actually calculated the total amount of consumption by state and the amount of requirements to support both oil and flower consumption, and it's 1.3 million pounds. So you're not so far off, and I'm in the process of refreshing that right now. So good job on those estimates.
Well, thank you. No, it's nice to know that it's grounded in statistical analysis there, because I think that it's a big marketplace. Let's just leave it at that for sure.
David Holland, let me throw a follow-up question to you.
Sure.
And I'm going to give you a little background. Massachusetts legalized medical marijuana. You had to be fully integrated to get a license. We had, I forget how many licensees who were in that market. Then we legalized rec. And part of the deal was that the medical licensees got first crack at the rec licenses. Our rec operators who first opened up were extensions of the medical operators. And that happens in every state because you can put together a dispensary quick, you can get a manufacturing facility put together reasonably fast. But no matter how quick you put together a cultivation facility, you can't rush Mother Nature. So you're waiting months for this plant to grow, to be harvested, to cure, and to be ready to be sold. How would it impact the development of the New York recreational market and, let's say, the social equity scene? Because one group in Massachusetts that got locked out in the beginning were people who were not fully integrated, and the social equity crowd couldn't afford to get fully integrated. So they're getting licensed, but very slowly and at a huge disadvantage. Would it help New York if you could import immediately so that you had inventory available to feed those smaller operators who are not going to be fully vertically integrated?
Absolutely. And I think that you've identified what's really one of the biggest concerns out there for advocates like myself and others, which is that there are 10 registered organizations. Those are the medical operators that are fully verticalized, meaning they plant, process, cultivate, process, and sell their product. And they now are being given entree as the leaders into the recreational market. And it's going to be probably 18 months to 2 years before anybody else is going to be coming in with legalized sales. So you're giving them a multi-billion-dollar head start in a business that I don't think that the medical operators had much to do with to sustain it for the last 50 years of prohibition. So there is talk, and I've been in talk with both the cannabis industry associations and some legislators about provisional licenses to allow legacy operators that already have the not only the wherewithal, but they have the supply chain to be able to go and actually become the first retail sellers out there. So they're not put out of the market effectively by the 2-year head start that the registered organizations otherwise get. And it's a question of fundamental fairness. And this is where the Dormant Commerce Clause comes into play. Fundamentally, people are being encouraged to spend millions and millions of dollars to put together cultivation facilities that, if and when that day comes of federal legalization, they may very well be put out of business because New York, environmentally and otherwise, just is not as good as like California and Oregon and elsewhere. And somebody is, as Adam's saying, is going to be the Iowa of corn. Somebody's going to be the Iowa of cannabis. And I think this is a fairness issue that needs to be considered, and putting legacy operators first with provisional licenses would be the best way to continue to at least let the marketplace operate as it has for the last 50 years.
I mean, I'm sorry, I don't mean to jump in, but which is why we are seeing in most of the limited license, consumer states that don't have, that don't organically have a cannabis production industry. That's where we're seeing domination by a few MSOs, right? If you look out at Oregon and California, we don't have that. right? Everybody says, oh, interstate commerce is going to happen, and then the big players are going to dominate the market. But the truth is that production out in the places where cannabis actually grows is very, diffuse. It's not, there's nobody that has 2% even of the production market, right? It's small farmers and small growers, right? And they're the ones who are getting killed out here for lack of access to markets that they need to serve. And it's smaller operators in those states that want to do anything else other than actually grow cannabis, that are then in total thrall to a few companies waiting for them to, grow, 1 million square feet in Lodi, New Jersey. And so, and the longer this goes, the more ensconced a few boardrooms get in dominating those markets. And the harder it is for smaller businesses and equity businesses to gain a foothold and to gain economic power. Right. And so this is why we think it's vital. I have also seen, I know you were mentioning this on the last segment, the dysfunction in Congress. And I've been in and out of drug policy reform and these issues for 30 years. And, I think that it's quite possibly, 5 years or more before we get full federal legalization. And in the meantime, you're going to wipe out the legacy market out here and disadvantage all of the small businesses that don't have, millions of dollars to build, giant facilities in places where cannabis, has no future.
Yeah. So just to piggyback on what Adam is saying, so I've actually looked at how much wealth destruction would occur if you insist upon these siloed state systems, and then there's full federal legalization. So basically what this does is it wipes out all these smaller businesses disproportionately because they have less revenue and less access to capital. But to set up all of these businesses only to have them lose out due to increased competition, the wealth destruction is to the tune of $80 billion. And so, those are real dollars. And right now there's no bankruptcy protection. So is there really truly a safety net for these businesses? I would say no, not at this point.
I mean, we're badly misincentivizing production in places where it has no future. And while a few large companies will be able to get their ROI, sell everything they can grow for the highest prices those states will ever see before the walls come down, everyone else who takes longer to license and get going is under huge threat, right? Where I come from New York City, right? And we had over a 20-year period, we had 430,000 people arrested for cannabis offenses. 86% of them were Black and Latino. Virtually none of them were arrested for growing cannabis, right? That's not what the industry has been there. And then when you silo the market, suddenly everyone says, "Oh, we can't see a pathway to equity," because you've turned the economics of an existing industry on its head, and you've put all the power in the hands of a production industry that has never existed there and has no real future there.
So I'm going to pull you guys down a little bit of a rabbit hole. I'm curious, and this
isn't a rabbit hole. Already?
No, we're going down a real rabbit hole now. This one is directed more to Beau and to Adam, and I'm just looking for a little stock advice here. So, if in fact interstate transport happens, how do you think I believe there's 2 REITs that are servicing this industry, right? And we invited the CEO of one of them on to hear what he had to say about this, but he didn't seem to have interest in this particular topic. But what happens to these REITs that have millions and millions of dollars invested in really big grow facilities in really cold states?
Go ahead, Beau.
Yeah. So interesting question. I've looked at this as well. So basically what happens is the value of the property appreciates due to the nature of it being in cannabis. Once the opportunity associated with cannabis is removed, then the value of that property goes back down to what is another comparable business that could be supported in that structure or on that property, et cetera. And so it's not as high a value. It'd be like taking a warehouse and saying, okay, it's been cultivating cannabis now. Maybe the best use for that outside of cannabis would be to, be a cold storage or to produce something else. So then on that, it would massively decrease the value of those properties and therefore the value of those REITs.
I've already figured out what the use of those warehouses are going to be. We tackled that on another show. We're going to turn them in, and we're not going to go into this one because it confused everybody last time. But the new wave in the funeral industry will be the composting of humans, not burying them underground, not pumping them through formaldehyde. And all of these beautifully tricked out warehouses are going to get turned into that kind of facility. I wrote an article about that, but we'll. So you think these REITs are really going to tank should interstate commerce come into play?
Well, there's a potential. I'm just the good-looking economist wearing a sweater vest, right? So I'm not somebody that can talk about stock prices and REITs, but if you think about it, the value of those properties would the economic value would decline because they're no longer useful for cannabis purposes.
Right.
Professor Mikos, go ahead. I wanted you to respond to how David read your paper, but go ahead.
Well, I think two broader points I think David is getting at with that question. One is that you've got some people who have invested in the existing regulatory structure. And there's a question about what do we do for them? Do we just tell them, hey, you took a risk, you took a gamble on this state law and this crazy new cannabis legalization, and sorry, but the national market is rising and you're out of luck. You lose millions of dollars, either in the grow facility that you made or in the REIT. So that's one big question. I think you could make a case for some sort of compensation for companies that stuck their neck out and invested money, not knowing what the federal government was going to do down the line, not knowing if there would be interstate commerce. The other thing is, I think interstate commerce could affect different parts of the industry in different ways. I think that's what Adam and Beau and David were getting at before. Maybe it's good for retail. I'm not sure I buy that. Certainly we see in alcohol, heavy concentration at the production side, much more fragmentation at the retail side. But that's kind of the weird regulatory structure of alcohol. That's what we've endorsed through the 21st Amendment, through federal statutes that give states a little bit more leeway. We could have consolidation. I think we could have great economies of scale in production, like in cultivation, in processing, in retail, and there's no little guys, or there's a few craft players at the margin. But I think it is important to recognize that interstate commerce will affect different parts of the industry different ways.
Okay, so I'm going to jump in here for a minute. I just realized we're past the bottom of the hour. We're going to take a very, very quick break. We're going to be right back. Don't go away. And we've got a couple of great additional guests we're going to bring in that you're really going to want to hear from. So hang with us. We'll be right back.
So I think there's one very important difference between me and most of my team members and other cannabis accounting firms, especially outsourced cannabis accounting firms. With a lot of the other firms, you're going to find bookkeepers or folks that were accountants for their entire career, but they were junior accountants. I've spent most of my career alongside CFOs at public companies with thousands of employees, public companies. So much of my career wasn't spent in the debits and credits. It was spent with the CFO, CEO, COO of large public companies, working on strategy, working on planning and big initiatives, working on projects such as mergers and integrations. So that high level experience, along with being able to do the debits and credits and having members of my team that also have fairly senior experience and also members of the team that are junior and can do the bookkeeping at a little bit lower cost than some of the people with the experience, gives our clients a much broader depth of experience than a lot of the other firms where you're hiring someone that is just a bookkeeper and can't help with the strategy side of it, or someone that's been an executive for a long time and can only help with the strategy but can't help with the hands-on.
Pro Cannabis Media Programming and PCM TV is supported by Revolutionary Clinics, Massachusetts' #1 medical dispensary where the patient comes first, and by Salient Systems for Video Surveillance. You've got regulations, Salient has solutions for your security needs. And by Accounting Buds, your #1 CPA specialist for the cannabis industry. And by Artery Pay, easy, cheap, fun, and legal, just like cannabis should be.
Difference is building a solution for that individual, not just a custom, here's a box, here's a video, here's how you make your VMS. We custom design and custom build every situation for exactly what the customer needs. And we keep the cost low. We have multiple tiers, as far as what you're looking at on the cost side of things. If you want a one-time, where you just pay one initial cost, we have that. If you want to maintain your system and have the highest protection and highest capabilities and highest upgrades at all times, we have different plans for you. But we scale it so it's scalable and affordable 100%.